Welcome to the first part of our two-part series of short videos for front office staff, Special Populations 101. Our first video is 101A, English Learners and Immigrant Students. Our second video is 101B, Students Experiencing Homelessness. Our outcomes for today are to understand English learner and immigrant identification, to identify the correct procedures for identification, and to identify the primary EL contact for your district. It is important for you to understand and be able to act on this information. Front office staff are often the first district staff that families meet. They are also typically in charge of all enrollment tasks and have responsibilities for pupil accounting and PowerSchool. Additionally, the office is the hub of the school and the place where other school staff bring their questions. For all these reasons and more, front office staff must be familiar with state and federal requirements around identification of English learners, immigrant students, and students experiencing homelessness. Front office staff must also know and be able to follow district procedures for what to do when enrolling these students or receiving questions from other staff. There are two items related to English learners and immigrant students that must be included in your enrollment paperwork. These are the home language survey to help determine EL status and the immigrant questionnaire used to determine immigrant status. Whether you use paper forms or electronic forms, both of these items are requirements from the federal government. It's okay if the exact language on your forms is slightly different, as long as it conveys and gathers the same information. The question for the home language survey are, is your child's native tongue a language other than English? And if families answer yes, what is that language? And the next question is the primary language used in your child's home or environment a language other than English? And if yes, what is that language? The questions for the immigrant questionnaire are, was the student born outside the United States? And when did the student enter US schools? If the answer is yes to number one and less than 3 years for question two, the student should be marked as immigrant in MSDS. Note that these are the only questions that should be asked about immigrant status. Make sure that your forms do not ask about legal status or country of origin. This graphic shows a typical English learner identification process. First, the office administers the home language survey during the enrollment process. Students are then potentially eligible if they answer yes to either question on the home language survey. The WAPT for kindergartners or the WIDA screener for all the rest of the grades is then administered. And students that are not proficient based on the criteria qualify for EL. Parents are notified and the student is identified in PowerSchool as an English learner. And then the student would receive English learner services as outlined in the district's language assistance program. And the student is then assigned to take the spring WIDA, which is the state assessment that's given every spring for English learners. A typical immigrant identification is shown here. When a student enrolls, they're administered the immigrant questionnaire during the enrollment. The students are potentially eligible if they say yes to the first question. The district follows up with families to determine the eligibility, and then the student is identified in PowerSchool as an immigrant. Upon doing so, the district then will have access to Title III immigrant funds, and the district can use those supplemental funds to help immigrant students. Typically, the person that's responsible for English learners is also responsible for immigrant students. There are many details to the steps for both for English learner identification and immigrant identification that the person in your district that's responsible for administering the English language program must be familiar with. Your main job in the front office is to understand the process and be able to work with your main English language contact in the district. So what about foreign exchange students? Foreign exchange student host families fill out the home language survey and the immigrant questionnaire on enrollment. Students may or may not qualify as EL depending on their native language. For example, foreign exchange students from England or Australia likely have a primary language of English and would check no. Students from Japan or France likely have a primary language of Japanese or French and would check yes. All foreign exchange students are immigrant students and they should be marked accordingly. At this time, we ask that you do two things. The first is to review your enrollment paperwork. Does your enrollment paperwork include the home language survey? Does your enrollment paperwork include the immigrant questionnaire? And if not, who in the district needs to be notified to include these required components? As a reminder, it's okay if your paperwork is electronic or paper version. Once you've verified that your enrollment paperwork is complete, if a family responds yes to the home language survey, or yes that the student was born outside the US and came to the US in the last 3 years, who in your district needs to be notified to follow up and make a final status determination? Once a determination has been made as to EL or immigrant status, whose responsibility is it to document that status in PowerSchool? And is that contact person and process written down so everyone understands? We hope that this information was helpful for your work with English learners and immigrant students. If you have any questions, please don't hesitate to reach out to the person in your district that's responsible for administering the English Learner Assistance Program. You're also welcome to contact Rachel Zaragoza or David Hunt at the MAISD.